So I am happy you jumped on the call with me here today. We have, last week you and me were together for our brokerage meeting, and I guess when you were coming on there, I wasn't expecting all of the information that you shared that was so relative to the investor standpoint or the leasing side of things, tenants' rights and all that stuff. Just because in history it hasn't, I guess my relationship with IAR, the local board, has really actually been more of the opposite. Maybe not so much with IAR, but with the local board, that, a lot of other realtors don't even care about the leasing side or the investor side, because they're more focused on the mom and pop type selling and upgrading houses and stuff like that. So it was awesome to hear you share that information. And because it caught me off guard, I wanted to get you back here and kind of talk with you on some of these things again.
Cool.
So, if you don't, I don't know if you have anything to say, but I just have a handful of questions. If you don't mind, we just kind of go through.
Yeah. Well, just kind of building on what you said, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I just last week, my role with the Illinois Realtors is doing outreach to designated managing brokers to oversimplify my target list. It's basically you take the largest firms and the heads of those firms, and then, work your way down the list and just try to build relationships, make sure that they know what their members' dues are paying for, what their brokers' dues are paying for. So anyway, long story short, I was talking to a broker last week who has a very large firm in Chicago, and he was telling me that he's seen this metamorphosis over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, where, just like you said, the brokers, it used to be they were very, very focused on residential sales, but he's seen where almost everybody in his office now, it actually started where a lot of brokers were becoming property investors to diversify their income streams. But then also a lot of newer brokers and brokers that are getting into the business won't turn down the rentals just because it's a little bit of another source of income. And then also it's kind of, people have flipped their way of thinking about it. They look at it more as like a lead generation. They're building a database. So I think it's something from the realtor side where I would say it's proliferated. Almost all realtors are looking at property investment, leasing, landlords as potential business builders. But then on the regulatory side, it's actually a perfect convergence, because on the regulatory side, you've seen market, and I blame it on market conditions and basically affordability, but that's really driven these regulations that you're seeing and these efforts that are, I would say they're well-intended, but they could have really, really bad consequences. So that's, we've seen the legislative, both at the local and state level, really, really sort of paint landlords and property investors as the bad guy and tenants as the good guy. And so that's where we're trying to, go out and educate.
In your opinion, on a national level, comparing Illinois to the other states, as far as some of these regulatory things that are coming down the road or that are in place already, where do you think we fare kind of on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being landlord friendly and 10 being the super most tenant friendly states?
We're actually surprisingly, not to get into politics, but you think red state, blue state, and actually for a, quote unquote blue state, I would say we're actually still relatively landlord friendly. I was at a Southside
Builders?
No, it was Southside not creative investors, but Southside Community Investment Association meeting. And there was a broker talking about, they have, national and international investors. And somebody asked the question, hey, with cap rates where they are in Chicago and, the rent control movement, is there concern over investors looking in Chicago? And he was like, look, if you look at the cap rates in New York and LA versus Chicago, he's like, there's still plenty of investor interest because it's better. It's a better investment environment than some of those other places. So I would give us, I don't know, we're somewhere in the middle. We're not the worst, but we're not the best.
Nice. And I would agree with you. I think that's what, local people that don't have a national perspective on it, I listen to other property managers and what they go through, whether it be in California or Washington, Oregon, or New York. They have to deal with a lot more than we've ever imagined dealing with yet. So
yes,
it makes you feel good at least.
Yeah.
So
we got to hold on to it. We have to hold on to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. So that's part of why we're here today, to educate myself, and then so I can share it with my network. But
Sure.
you used the word rent control. Do me a favor, just explain real fast what rent control is and what happened this past year, which is actually how you and me met, and then what could be on the kind of frontier for that.
Yeah, so the simplest way to explain rent control, it's when the government, whether that's a local government, state government, basically they put a cap or a ceiling on what a landlord can charge for rent. So it's basically the government coming into a landlord and saying, you can't charge any more than this ceiling. And the reason behind it, it's well-intentioned. It's, it's basically saying, hey, we've got to protect affordable housing. People can't afford places to rent anymore. That's the reason that they say, oh, we should cap rent. The problem is what ends up happening, we've seen this play out in California, New York, where they have rent control. And then we did a study in Chicago. What ends up happening is when you cap rent, you end up with less inventory or less units in the market, because a lot of the units convert to condos, and then a lot less investment flows in, creating more inventory. And if you all remember from your real estate classes, your pre-license, when we talk about market conditions, what happens when there's less inventory? Prices go up, right? And so rent control actually has been proven. There was a US government study that was done in San Francisco that showed that with rent control, it caused prices to spike for renters. So anyway, that's what rent control is. In Illinois, there's actually a state ban on any rent control. So back in the 90s, I think it was, I should know the exact year, but back in the 90s, the Illinois Realtors led the charge to actually pass a law that said local governments cannot do rent control for all of those market conditions. But now, in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a growing movement of tenants' rights organizations that have been pushing, they call it the Lift the Ban Coalition. So they want to lift the ban. They believe that once the ban is lifted, then Chicago, which I think they're right, I think Chicago would institute rent control. And then you'd see other municipalities around the state, it'd create this patchwork, kind of like California, where different local governments institute different rent control measures.
You think if something like that passed, you think the city would change that something? As the world sits right now, do you think Chicago would move to pass something like that pretty quick?
Yes.
Really? Okay. That
the shortest answer I can give you.
You sound pretty confident. Now, rent control so this was on the table last year, and it got voted down on the state level, correct?
Correct.
And it's not being proposed right now, but it's something that could come back up again, or what does the future look like, or time-wise?
So the way I would characterize it is each year, the sponsor of the legislation introduces the legislation. This year was a weird year because of the pandemic. So, if it didn't deal directly with pandemic issues, it was kind of like off the table. Rent control kind of fell into that category. That being said, coronavirus and the pandemic and all of the economic fallout from it has really created an environment where my fear is that rent control has been gaining momentum. So what we'll see, I think in the fall, the state legislature will have what's called a fall session, which is just a few days. I think we'll see talk. We may see some headlines or people doing events in Chicago trying to promote rent control. But then in the spring is a little bit of a misnomer. They call it the spring session, but it starts in about January. So in early next year, I think you'll see this legislation get introduced again. And I think it's going to continue to gain momentum because of all the economic hardship that, and I'm not saying that landlords aren't experiencing economic hardship, but there's a lot of renters who have lost income or are hurting because of the coronavirus. And I think that's building to this argument. We need, for people saying we need rent control. I think we're going to see that in the spring. It's going to come back with a vengeance.
The rent control in the suburbs, what would make a suburb want to have rent control, I guess, in their particular community. Chicago, I can see with the politics and all that, it happening, preventing gentrification, stuff like that, or because of gentrification, changing so many neighborhoods over the years. Why would a suburb lean towards having rent control?
Well, I think the purest answer to that is affordability issues. So if you look at, and it's kind of like a combination of affordability with political makeup, right? So if you saw the lift the ban, if the ban was lifted on rent control, Chicago would probably go. Oak Park, I'm guessing might. Evanston, some of the north suburbs might start to go for it in terms of rent control. But one of my concerns that I have, I can't remember if I discussed this with you previously. One of my concerns that I have is that some municipalities might use it as almost a perverse way to discourage rentals, period.
Yeah.
So I could see maybe not a Romeoville, but like, what's a good example of like an anti-renter?
Country Club Hills.
Yeah, I could see like a Country Club Hills just saying, yeah, we're going to institute rent control and we're going to put the cap at a level that just makes it completely unrealistic. You can only charge $200 a month rent. And so then basically everybody's just going to go, oh, well, if I'm a landlord there, I'm selling my house because I can't rent it and possibly make any money. So I could see something like that happening on the flip side.
Let me ask you this question. You might not know the answer, but how rent control with like Section 8 housing, now that Section 8 vouchers are spread out throughout the Chicagoland, in the Collier County as well too, how does that come into play where the HUD actually sets those rates versus an area, particular area that might have rent control in it?
So I think getting into here's my political answer, or my politician answer. My politician answer is that if Chicago or any other municipality were to set up rent control, what they would do is they'd have like a board or a group, like it would all be in the legislation. They'd have a board or a group that would come together to determine what are the market rents or how are they going to cap it. Like I think it was it Portland or Oregon basically said, they set a base rate and then they said it can only go up by 7% every year. Of course, now they're already talking about dialing that back. But so that's the political answer, is like it'll be within whatever legislation is set up. I think, so just kind of thinking out loud, I think what they would probably do is work together with the housing authorities that set those, so that they were kind of in concert with each other, if that makes sense. So from a practical standpoint, I mean, I think they would find a way for those to sort of be equal to each other.
Nice. You said before, IAR fought to help make real estate a essential business during shutdown. And this was something that I didn't know either before talking to you. There was other states that were not, real estate services were not essential. Tell us some more about kind of how you guys, what you guys had to do, or why you did it, I guess, to make keep working, allow us to keep working.
Well, the why is because, I mean, our Illinois Realtors is made up of licensed realtors who join a local association and step up to that professional level of being a realtor. And so we did it to fight for the realtors, right? To make sure that you could choose in a safe and healthy and legal way to go out and continue to make money as a realtor, even in the stay-at-home order when a lot of businesses were forced to shut down. So that's the why. It goes back to really relationship building. So I think we're trying to spread the word about our relationships we have. But Illinois Realtors has been around for a little over 100 years. We're based in Springfield. Our whole purpose is about protecting private property rights. And so what does that mean practically? It means making sure there's professionalism in the industry, that we're advocating for our consumers. But really on the question of keeping realtors deemed an essential business, it comes down to relationships. So we build relationships with elected officials and regulators to make sure that realtors have their voice heard on issues like this. So when we started hearing that there was going to be a stay-at-home order issued, we started leveraging those relationships and really did a lot of work with IDFPR, the regulatory agency, to ensure that we could have the governor's executive order include real estate as an essential business. And I think they made it for the economic argument. We demonstrated you can do real estate safely, even in a pandemic. So don't shut down and have negative, this huge economic fallout from shutting down that industry. And ultimately, they agreed with us, and it was written into the executive order.
Wow. So I think about, you say that, and your guys' goal is for your membership first and foremost, and the people, but the amount of people that you affected positively, whether it be the consumer or all of the support staff that might be in an office like ours, or at a title company that kind of kept those things moving. Like you guys really went out on a limb to help a lot more than just your realtor base. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, and it bared out in the numbers. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, and your brokers and anybody in the industry has seen. It was interesting because in like June, July, we saw this ramp up of activity, and I kept hearing from the managing brokers that I was talking to, like, oh my gosh, the brokers are so busy. It's crazy right now. And then when the July market stats came out, it showed proof of what we had been hearing anecdotally. Statewide, home sales were up 14% over last year. Prices were up, I think it was 12%. That was statewide. And then for the Chicagoland area, it was a little bit lower, but still way up over last year. One of the things, of course, driving that though is low inventory. So, but if the executive order had said, no, real estate is not essential, you are not allowed to practice, those numbers would have been way, way lower.
Yeah, no, you said something last week. Inventory right now in Illinois is pretty low. Since what point? Refresh me.
So inventory right now is actually the lowest it's been since the Great Recession. So tracking it since the Great Recession, it's actually the lowest point that it's been for the past however many years that is.
Wow, that's crazy. So
yeah.
So sticking around the pandemic conversation, eviction moratorium.
Yes.
How, give me your thoughts on what you guys have done or what you've attempted to do, and kind of how that looks going forward as far as help for maybe landlords, or help for additional subsidies for tenants. I know we have the recent program that just came out. So any information you can say on what you got, your involvement's been there.
Yeah. So we're, if you think about the eviction moratoriums, there's kind of like three levels, right? There's the local, the state, and the federal. So local, let me start with the state, and it'll make sense in a second. So the states has been extended to October 19th. That's the most recent extension that the governor just did. So landlords can't move to evict at the earliest October 19th. Now then, Chicago has said that their eviction moratorium is going to go 60 days past whatever Illinois is. All right. So there's that local eviction moratorium. And then the federal, the White House directed the CDC to do an eviction moratorium that will go until the end of the year. The one sort of difference on the federal one is that the tenant has to be able to show proof of hardship in order to be eligible for the federal eviction moratorium. So our concern is the longer this goes on, it's almost like the snowball is rolling down the hill, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and the government is almost creating, an impending avalanche. I don't know what a good analogy is, but it's going to be the longer we delay, the bigger a problem it's going to be, not only for the number of people who are going to be facing evictions and what that's going to mean, but then also for landlords who aren't able to collect rent. You hear anecdotally from so many people, landlords, that basically the tenants aren't returning any phone calls and aren't paying, or who say, well, I don't have to pay rent right now. So our take on it is to avoid that financial avalanche. You've got to have financial assistance. I mean, nobody likes to have their hand out, but this is unprecedented times. And if the government's going to say that you can't evict, well, then they've got to come in with some sort of financial assistance so that those mom and pop landlords that might have a giant mortgage on their investment property that's not generating any income, that they are still able to stay afloat, and then we don't have an eviction and a foreclosure crisis on our hands. So at the state level, there was $150 million that we advocated for and was set aside by IDA. Mark, I know you're familiar with the rental assistance program, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think everybody's still kind of waiting on pins and needles to see which applications get approved and which don't. What I just saw as an update to IDA's website is that they've started apparently approving some. I haven't met anybody who's been approved, but oh, okay. So
we heard one. I don't know what happened over the weekend, but they're updating the tenants directly. So we've been trying to notify the tenants, like, hey, keep an eye out because we won't know unless you know.
Oh my gosh. All right. And then they're going to be doing it through October. So I think it's just a matter of them trying to process the applications is my assumption. So that's the state level. And then I think, that will kind of lead into, I'm kind of getting in the weeds, but that will lead up to veto session. I think we'll be at a good point to look at, okay, where are we at? Do we need to try to advocate for more rental assistance? Now at the federal level, the National Association of Realtors has really been advocating with both Congress, but then the White House as well, to say, hey, if you're going to do an eviction moratorium, there's got to be rental assistance that goes along with it. NAR just posted an update last week, an article about how they've been advocating and specifically working with the White House to try to get some rental assistance. So I'm hoping that something this fall shakes loose for some federal rental assistance.
Do you see anything going to landlords? Like landlords, you think it'll always stream through tenants up to landlords as far as assistance?
It's hard to say. I mean, if Illinois does something, if they do more than what they've already done, I think it'll be similar. Once they have sort of a template in place, I think they'll stick with it. At the federal level, I think it'll probably be more direct towards landlords. But the key thing at the federal level is going to be, showing proof of hardship. I mean, I don't think that they're just going to turn on a spigot of money.
Was it you that told me 80,000 people in Illinois applied, and I think they have, if everyone got the max amount, they get 30. It would cover about 30,000 people. Is that you that told me that?
I can't remember. I haven't heard a number of how many applied. I would like to find that number out, but I believe they had budget to fund 30,000.
Yeah, so I heard 80,000 applied. Now, what I heard last week that I haven't heard before was, the grant was supposed to be for 5,000, but depending on the situation, they might not give you the full amount. I didn't know that. I thought everyone kind of qualified for the full amount up front. So we'll see.
Okay.
We'll have to follow up on that one.
Yeah.
So that's a great concern right now of, like you said, it dragging it out is what's going to do more harm than good for the help side. So I love the federal side of things, where they at least have to have some sort of point of proof that you have a hardship or you can't be evicted, because everything else is just, we've lost all leverage to deal with the bad people. It's not the right word, but the people that are just taking advantage, I guess.
Right.
So.
Well, and then what I fear, and you can edit this out if it's getting too much into the weeds, but what I fear is that what's ending up happening is then you'll have some of the bad landlords, and we all know, like, there are some that are bad. They're going to start doing things like water, if a few people start doing the bad things, that's what's going to grab all the headlines. And then that's just going to give more fuel to the fire when those things like rent control come up. And then all of the good landlords and good property managers are going to suffer because of those few that did the bad things. But people get desperate when they're facing down foreclosure, right? So I don't know, it's a bad situation.
Random question. How many realtors are there in Illinois?
So there's about 50,000 realtors in Illinois.
How many of those would you say are in that Chicago, Collier County area?
So if I look at like membership counts, between the Main Street Association of Realtors and Chicago Association of Realtors, it's approximately just over like 30,000, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's our competition right there. Wow. Okay. But not all of them are practicing. I think you said last time, you have people, you have an architect that's got a real estate license or whatnot.
Sure.
Let me ask this. Do you have any idea as a comparison to maybe 10 years ago before the Great Recession or after the Great Recession, as far as how many realtors are in the state? Do you have any idea of that off the whim?
So I'm rusty on the exact numbers pre-Great Recession.
We lost a lot of people.
It was higher than it is now. So we're not back to pre-recession levels.
Okay.
But I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I think about 5 years ago was when I started working for the Illinois Realtors. I think we were, don't quote me on this, bad thing to say in an interview, but I think we were closer to like 35,000 statewide.
Okay. So there's
been a lot of growth in the last 5 years.
Cool. Just curious. That was more of a curiosity question.
Yeah.
A couple more topics before I let you go here. I want to talk about just amendment. I think this is a big one that passed this year, and a lot of people do not know about. Can you kind of give us a rundown of what it is and maybe how you guys are working around it or with it?
For sure. So the Just Housing Amendment, and the reason we call it an amendment is it's a Cook County law, and Cook County has a human rights ordinance. This was an amendment to the human rights ordinance. But I want to back up even further than that. So what prompted the Just Housing Amendment was a few years ago, the Supreme Court had a decision about a thing called disparate impact. And real simply what that means is that if you're doing an action, even if it's unknowingly, you're doing an action and it has an outsized impact on a protected class, it could be considered a fair housing violation. So it caused at the time, it caused a lot of confusion and concern about, well, what should we do? And where the rubber hit the road was with criminal background checks. So what was found at the national level was criminal background checks have an outsized negative impact on people of protected classes. And so NAR at the time, National Association of Realtors, had some guidance. You can still find it online. It's good guidance on what types of, it's not saying you can't do a criminal background check at the national level, but what types of things should you consider and what types of things should you not consider so that it truly has a direct impact on the property. Okay, so set that federal stuff aside, it created a bit of confusion. So then the motivation at Cook County was, well, why don't we clarify this and get real specific about it? And so what they decided was, let's amend the human rights ordinance to provide some housing protections for people with a criminal background. And so the way you hear it talked about is it made criminal background a protected class. And so what does that mean? The way I always like to introduce it is, if you're a practicing realtor, you should know about fair housing. You should know about protected classes already. Think about how you have formed your business and how you act each day with regard to fair housing, and include, if you're doing your work in Cook County, include people with a criminal background as one of the protected classes, all right? But then Cook County, to their credit, frankly, got very, very specific about how this impacts rental leasing. And so what it does is it sets up a two-step process where if you are doing rental leasing, you can't consider a person's criminal background until they have passed an initial financial assessment. So it's not saying you just have to rent to anybody if they have a criminal background. What they're saying is, check if the person has an ability to pay the rent and be a good tenant. And if all things being equal, they do, then, and only can't just eliminate somebody if they have a criminal background. You have to look at, does their criminal background, could it actually have a negative impact on the property or the other tenants of the property? So is it a violent offense? Is it, is it something like they're an arsonist? And the other thing is, it can only be considered if it was in the last 3 years. All right. So the theory being that if somebody did have an offense many, many years ago, and now they're applying, they've paid their debt to society, right? So if they were convicted, they went to prison, they've paid their debt to society, so that criminal conviction should not be hung over their heads as a continued negative thing. So that's the theory. I've heard from a lot of landlords actually, and people who do rental leasing, that they like it because it actually just puts all the cards on the table, and it focuses the application on the tenant's ability to pay, as opposed to maybe this red herring like, oh, I got in a car, I had a DUI, and just whatever the thing is. So anyway, I've heard actually positive things about it in practice. One of the negatives is that it's a new law, so it was just went into effect in February. So I think we're still trying to really pound the pavement to get the word out, because I think there are still people that don't even know that it's a law and that they need to be following it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm seeing that on the property management side. I'm seeing a lot more that do not know about it than do know about it. And I think the risks are out there for property managers that do maybe a lot in DuPage County and then only do a handful in Cook County a year, that they don't realize that they're doing something wrong even. So,
yeah. Well, and you mentioned risk, so I want to jump in because I think it's important to note this isn't just one of those things where it's like, oh, if I violate it, nobody's going to care. This could, so what did I say at the beginning? It's considered a fair housing law. And in Illinois, you could lose your license for violating a fair housing law. So this could be not only, paying penalties, including court costs for the person that brings the complaint, but you could ultimately have the suspension or loss of the real estate license.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's like a daily, even around your marketing too, I believe there's a daily fine you could potentially be up against as well.
Right. You don't want to have anything in there that says like no federal, no felons need apply, no criminal background, things like that.
So, all right. The last but not least, the question that I think has the greatest effect going forward, and the message that maybe we want to work on getting out there. If there's things we could do to control any part of it, as far as how it will roll out. But you mentioned to me last week about a comparable ordinance coming out in all of Cook County that compares to the CRLTO. Tell me about why that came up in recent months, years, and the likelihood it'll pass, and maybe a little that you know about it, and the time frame as well too. Because I've told a couple people about it. First thing they ask is when's it going to happen?
Yeah. So as you and your folks know, Chicago has a residential landlord tenant ordinance, and Cook County, my understanding is this was motivated by the coronavirus. Cook County board, so all of Cook County, the board has said, we want to prevent people from being locked out of their rentals, for a failure, if they are a few days late on, this is how they've contexted. If they're a few days late on their rent, we don't want them to get locked out of their rentals. And actually, when you say that, like as a negotiating standpoint, that's actually a good place to start from, because I don't think I think most landlords, we all know the 5-day notice, right? So you do the 5-day notice, and if they pay, well, great. Okay, then we start over, right? I can't speak for everybody, but that's what I've heard is a lot of consensus, right? So it's actually not a bad negotiating place to start from. What's scary is that the proposals that we've heard could move as quickly as by the end of October. And what they're looking at doing is a tenant landlord ordinance that in some ways is similar to Chicago, but in some ways has some provisions that are could be much more damaging to property investors and landlords. So similarities, it would require no lockouts. So, an anti-lockout provision. It would require that security deposits be kept in an interest-bearing account. Of course, our concern with that is what we've seen in eviction court is that if the amount is off by even a very small amount, the fines and penalties can be insanely high. So we're concerned about that. Differences. So these are a little bit concerning. There's no exemption for smaller or owner occupied rental units in the Cook County proposal. So basically it would apply to every single rental unit in all of Cook County. We also don't know how it would interact with an existing landlord licensing, like a local ordinance. So that's another cause for concern. Which one's going to take precedence, because there's going to be conflicting aspects. Two more things that are concerning. One is it would ban the use of move-in fees. So a lot of landlords have stopped collecting a security deposit, and instead they're just doing a move-in fee to try to avoid those penalties that can be, lobbed against them if they get the amount wrong. It would ban move-in fees. And then the last one, which just makes my head spin, is that if a tenant abandons the property and leaves their personal possessions, their personal property, couches, mattresses, giant TVs, all those things that we hate to see as landlords when somebody moves out, the landlord would be responsible for storing it in case the tenant ever comes back and says, hey, I want my stuff back. And we're not sure how long they would have to store it. I mean, that one just makes my head spin. If you think about the costs of trying to have a storage unit and what it would cost to try to keep this stuff inventoried. So that's the ordinance, that's the proposal that's out there. What we're trying to do is work with the county and the county board to say, first off, we need to see exemptions for smaller, smaller property owners. So we need to see, right now we're saying if you own 15 units or less, you should be exempt. That's the second thing is, how does this conflict with local ordinances? So we want to talk that out. In terms of a time frame, this will probably get heard in committee sometime in October. And what we're trying to do, again, is not have it be rash. We just want to try to have plenty of discussion on this to make sure that it just doesn't move too quickly, and that we don't have unintended consequences.
So they have there's man, it blows my mind. So has there been, I guess I don't see it on our side of things, and I don't see too many unhappy tenants. Like, I mean, outside of Chicago, has there been issues that have really led to this, or is this just more regulations, people pushing more regulation for the sake of pushing more regulation?
I mean,
or somewhere between.
One of the county board members was a little bit trite when they were asked, why are you encouraging this right now? And they said, well, because I like regulation. And I mean, they were just kind of flippant. I think, in more deliberate talks with some of the county board members, the reality is kind of what I talked about before. You have that small group of bad landlords that ruins it for everybody else, because what they tell me, the county board members and their staff, is, we hear the stories, we get the phone calls of, the person who's had their water shut off, or whatever thing that happens. And so they want to try to go after those bad landlords. Our pitch is like, there are ways to go after the bad landlords that isn't going to penalize every other, the other 90% of landlords that are doing a good job and have a good relationship with their tenants. So I think the reality is they do hear from constituents that have negative experiences, tenants, but also, just doing regulation for the sake of regulation is, I mean, as we know, that costs dollars and cents. And anytime that you're manipulating or distorting the market, that's going to have a negative impact for people.
Yeah. And then no non-refundable moving fees. we do that pretty much in Chicago. But on the flip side, though, so that actually makes housing more affordable for a lot of people in Chicago, because instead of having to bring all that money to the table, they bring maybe sometimes a third less.
So actually, I can understand why that would be your initial impression, right? But what do you think is going to happen if you don't want to charge a security deposit and you can't charge a move-in fee? What do you think landlords are going to do?
Raise rent?
I think there's a pretty good chance that those costs will be offset by rents going up.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
And so, I mean, that's one of the pitches is like, what we do is we try to educate the elected officials to have them understand these are pretty simple numbers that, when you buy a property, there's costs and then there's income, and there has to be some level of profit in between the cost and the income in order to operate. And when you start to increase those costs with things like storage fees or taking away, a move-in fee or security deposit, you're going to have to find ways to offset those costs through income, right? So I don't know if that's an effective argument, but I mean, at this time when housing has already become so unaffordable, we're trying to educate elected officials that when you add these regulations, it actually drives up the cost of housing, makes it more expensive for people.
Yeah. So 80, I think it's 82 or 83 communities now have rental licenses, which adds another, I describe it as another layer of cost between getting the annual fee, getting it inspected, the handful of things you might fail for inspection. Some of the cities are actually harsher than others, which you have to almost budget a few percent in for whatever they're going to make you fix that year.
Right.
So yeah, no, you hit it spot on where these layers add on additional fees that have to be recouped somewhere. And it's not going to be in property tax relief, right?
Right. Of course.
So, cool. So how does that, so going forward, I mean, this sounds like it's hitting pretty fast here. What can investors do or realtors do, or what do your members, what can we do to help put our word in, I guess, or our opinion in, or?
Yeah. So for realtors, what I would encourage you to do is go to illinoisrealtors.org and check out our advocacy page. And if you're a realtor, definitely sign up for our calls for action. So you should, if you're a realtor, you're going to get the email, but a lot of times when we send a mass email, it's going to go to your junk folder. I mean, it's just the reality. So sign up for our text messages. So you can text to the number 30644. If you pull out your phone and pull up your text message, 30644. The message is Realtors and hit send. Then you're going to be enrolled in our text message calls for action. And I anticipate, I mean, unless negotiations go really, really well, I anticipate that we're going to end up doing a call for action in October. So you'll get a text message, click on the link, and that's going to take you to a message that you can send to your county board member. So it's basically you click a few buttons and then you'll get a message sent to your county board member. So that's the easiest, least time consuming way. If you're not a realtor, what you can do is check out, we have a website, realpropertyalliance.org, or if you just Google Real Property Alliance, we've got information up there about how non-realtors can get involved in these issues. Again, we've got like a newsletter sign up, and when a hot issue strikes, we alert everybody. So that would be my suggestion. Sign up for the text messages, and then Real Property Alliance if you're not a realtor.
What's that text number one more time?
30644, and the message you'll send is Realtors.
All right. I'll make sure I add that in this video in the links.
Nice.
All right. And anything else that the investment community here in Chicago and the Collier County should know that's on the horizon, or can help you and IAR in their mission?
There's a lot of changes going on in Chicago and Cook County, specifically with regard to landlord tenant and investment issues. I would say the thing that just makes my stomach turn is when you meet a property investor that's like, oh, that government stuff, that has nothing to do with me. And it's like, nothing could be further from the truth. So pay attention, first and foremost. It doesn't have to be through the realtors, but if there's a local investment group or a landlord group, if you're a non-realtor, one of the really good ones is the Rogers Park Builders Group, Southside Community Investment Association, the neighborhood organizations. So pay attention. And then when something is happening and they say, contact your elected official, make sure you contact your elected official, because that when you have a lot of people reach out, if you have 5,000, 6,000 people reach out to an elected official, it can actually do a lot of good. It can move a mountain. So I guess that would be my advice. Pay attention. And when you're asked to reach out, reach out.
Awesome. Awesome. Hey, I appreciate your time here today. This has been awesome. And I'm going to probably force you to get back with me either Q1 or end of this year to kind of go over some of these things, especially the Cook County one. So
For sure. Yeah.
but I appreciate your help in informing us on all this stuff.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Thanks, Mark.